We are joined now by Graham. Excuse me.
Whoa.
Got a little thing.
Did you get emotional thinking about Sparty there?
I did. I got real emotional thinking about our next guest, Graham Couch, columnist for the Lansing State Journal. Apologize about that, Graham. Got a little scratch in my throat. How you doing this morning?
I'm well. That's the way a lot of MSU fans sound when they think about the defense.
Oh, that's tough. All right, Graham, let's just start.
Let's start there.
Let's start there. So, us being Nebraska-based and right here in Omaha, we have a lot of our own consternation when it comes to how we feel the national landscape values and looks at Dylan Raiola at quarterback, because obviously we see him at a higher pedestal than where many people put them. What's the fan base of Michigan State feeling when they're going up against Dylan with the pass defense that the Spartans have showcased through their first couple of games?
Yeah, I don't think it's specific to him at all. You're right. I mean, nationally, I don't think the perception of him is probably what it is locally. And part of that, though, is I think for MSU, their problems have been more about them, and they've faced a couple of good quarterbacks already, both against USC and Boston College, who frankly ate them up, and so they're not. I think that's just one of those givens. If you've got a capable, good quarterback, they're concerned and they're worried that if they can't disrupt the timing and they give you all day, that people will actually confuse Patrick Mahomes and Raiola like that. That's I think that's the concern. But it's not a disrespect to him as much as there's just overall real concern about the defense's ability to disrupt any decent quarterback.
So, Graham, as you kind of try and diagnose what the issues have been, you mentioned they've seen a couple good quarterbacks already this year. Does it feel like it's a scheme or a systemic issue? Is it a personnel issue? Like, what have you seen that? I guess the question is, does it feel fixable over the course of the season?
I mean, to a small degree, it probably is. I think the hope that it is, because otherwise it's going to be potentially a long season. I mean, they're coming off a bye, as every team gets, and then that sometimes is an important week where you improve a little bit. But there is some concern, I think, from portions of the fan base about Joe Rossi, the defensive coordinator. But he's been a pretty good coordinator a couple places, and I just don't think he's an idiot. So I think it's the Jimmies and the Joes. And when you look at Michigan State's, sort of the way they constructed their roster and the priorities this last offseason, they clearly spent their money and their resources improving their offense, which they've done, both at receiver and on the offensive line, which needed an upgrade to survive this year. And so they're not a place that had unlimited resources this year. So, I mean, we'll see what that looks like in the rev share era. And I know Matt Rule's talked about this as well. And, sometimes you don't have the ability to just go buy the best defensive line in the country like Texas A&M did or whatever. And that's sort of where they are. They've got a couple, decent young pieces that they like. They've got, frankly, I don't even know what their level is at linebacker and in the secondary, because I think they do have a couple decent pieces. But when you can't get to the quarterback, everything looks bad no matter what you have. So you don't even, it's even hard to evaluate. The problem with what happened last week was they were also or 2 weeks ago when they played against USC, they also weren't very good against the run. And so that had been something they'd been okay at. And like, if you can't do anything, then you're in trouble.
So you mentioned the offensive line there, and it's been a place, obviously, with Ramil being reported he'll be out for this upcoming week and probably a few weeks into the future. And then, you've got some guys there, particularly at the guard spots, that have struggled a little bit over the course of the season. What's been the issue on the offensive line? Again, is it a Jimmy and Joe situation where you just don't have the horses, or is it a thing where, hey, they still just need a little bit of time to gel together?
Well, so this will be an interesting week for that because, as you guys are aware, Nebraska has not been great at stopping the run, right? Mm-hmm. That's not been the strength. And this has been a Michigan State team that has been noticeably improved. Now, everything's relative. Like, they were just a really bad offensive line last year in all phases. and they have been that at times quite a bit in the last decade. So the improvement, I mean, they've been able to run the football from time to time pretty well. Not maybe as consistently as they'd like. I think some of their bigger problems have been in protection of Aiden Childs. And they're lucky he's as fleet-footed as he is, or they'd be in real trouble. So yeah, I think it's a line that is improved, that's okayish, that's not the reason they can't do things as a team, but it's not where you need to be to compete, to contend in the Big Ten and push people around and win enough battles. They're just so. I think they've got a really good offensive line coach. That's one area I'm pretty confident in their coaching ability. I just think they've still got work to do in development and recruitment, and they have had some injuries, but they're better depth-wise than they were a year ago. So they can withstand them, and everybody has injuries. It's like one of those things. If you've got a full complement of defensive backs, then that's the news, not the fact that you got injured defensive backs, the way football goes these days.
Graham, when looking at kind of how this contest may shake out, you mentioned the running game for Michigan State and just getting ready for it. Is the general vibe that you're getting leading into this week, coming out of that bye week, that this could be more of a matchup that Michigan State allows Aiden Childs to try to, win the game and play like a quarterback duel against Dylan Raiola and just, keep the ball in his hands? Or is it a slow it down game, limit the possessions, and just run the ball and try to get out of there as fast as you can and see how low scoring this one can go?
Yeah, I mean, their offense needs to help their defense out in certain ways, but I don't, and if they can run the ball, they can have, length of possession and really do that to be the team. That would help. I think what they need to do is score points on offense, and they've got a good offense. They've got some explosive ability on offense, and if they're scoring, then that's fine. It's a real question this weekend exactly how explosive Nebraska is relative to what this defense is. I mean, I think the way Michigan State sees this week, at least a lot of MSU fans do, and they're probably right on this, is it's a telling week. Not so much that they have to win the game. It's a road game at a solid team in Nebraska. But, I think a lot of us watched Nebraska play Michigan and saw that, they did not win the battle at the line of scrimmage. And so if you don't hold your own there against Nebraska, then it's probably going to be trouble a few other times this year. And so it's about how it looks, that it's competitive, that it looks like two teams that belong on the field against each other. And I think offensively they'll be okay. Whether they can run the ball or not, I mean, they should be able to based on what Nebraska's shown. Nebraska's pass defense has been really good. MSU's pass offense has been their strength. But they ought to be a good enough pass offense at this point from what we've seen to still, have their moments there. So I think it's about just being productive offensively. And there's, I know there's a lot about complementary football, but at this point, the complementary football is scoring points.
Graham, how do you think they'll weigh? You mentioned it there. Their pass offense for Michigan State has been their strength, obviously going up against the strength of the Nebraska defense in the secondary and their pass defense. How much do you weigh, because this is a conversation we've been having a lot in Nebraska, honestly, is how much do you weigh kind of who you want to be and trying to take advantage of what you perceive the defense of the opposing or the weakness of the opposing defense to be versus, hey, this is what we're best at. This is what we're good at. We should stick with that.
It's a good question. I think if they can run the ball, they'll, they'd like to do that. They like to be balanced. The thing is, where they are potentially, their difference makers are in the passing.
Mm-hmm.
If you're talking about where they're
like Nick Marsh, really, really good.
Yeah, Nick Marsh is an NFL player. He just got to, it's just going to take a minute until he's, he's only a sophomore. But he's got a chance to be a first-round pick. Aiden Childs is, it's hard to know exactly what NFL scouts think of him, but he's a greatly improved player who has all the tools. And so that's, he's got pro ability. I'll put it that way. I don't, there's consistency things, there's things he's going to have to show over time whether he's that player. Omari Kelly, the receiver that they picked up from Middle Tennessee State, been in Auburn early in his career. When I talk about upgrading the offense in the offseason, like he's a legit if that's your number 2 receiver, you're in really good shape,
Mm-hmm.
guy. And they have some other speed guys and real strength there. And so I think you got to, if they're going to play, they've got Michigan still on the schedule. They've got Indiana. They've got Penn State. If you're going to compete with those teams, those guys are going to have to be special at times. And they've got to be guys who it doesn't matter who the defense is. And I think when I look back at the best Michigan State teams people think about, they've had players. If you go back eras, guys everybody's heard of. The T.J. Ducketts of the world, the
Mm-hmm.
Plaxico Burress's, Charles Rogers. Didn't matter if it was Alabama or whoever was on the field. Those guys were a problem. And I think the passing game for MSU has some athletes where that is the case, and that's got to show itself if they're going to have a chance to punch up and pull upsets.
So Graham, you brought up you weren't sure how NFL scouts would think about Aiden Childs and his ability. I'm curious how Michigan State and their fans feel about Aiden Childs. Obviously, gotten off to a pretty good start this year. What's the thinking around Childs just in East Lansing and how people are receiving his performance early in the year?
Yeah, it's changed completely from last year in terms of how he's perceived. Last year I think people were pretty disappointed by it.
Mm-hmm.
He came in with a lot of hype. He was a true sophomore. He was still 18 years old when the year started. He's real young for his age. Everybody's young for their age. Young for his grade, I should say.
Yeah.
But he was, I think there was disappointment. There was also disappointment because, in the whole Jonathan Smith arriving, transfers coming in, transfers coming out, Michigan State lost Sam Leavitt, who's at Arizona State, who's a really good quarterback, and they got Childs. So there's that comparison there. And but this year, it's turnovers were his big issue. That hasn't been a problem this year, and he's done a much better job of keeping his eyes up and making plays, and I just think people are beginning to trust that he's the player he's shown. And now at this point, they played a USC team that, I don't want to say their strengths on defense because they have some guys on the defensive line that are tough, but they've beaten a Boston College team that's sort of fallen apart. So it'll be interesting. These are the moments where he's got to kind of prove that. But people are beginning to trust him, and people like him, and I don't think any MSU fan thinks he's their issue.
Graham, when just looking at this game from the Michigan State perspective as well, when it comes to just the totality of the entire season, where does this Nebraska game rank, or just where is it valued among some of the other games, either that came before or after it? Is it one of those that the fan base is looking at as maybe a turning point game, that they're going to learn something about their program? How are they valuing this comparative to the rest of the schedule?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a swing game. Now, they've said that about other games, but that's sort of what this season is. And as other teams show themselves and things unfold, they're 3-1, and they have UCLA next week, who's awful, coming to East Lansing, right? So at the midpoint, you're 4-2 at worst going into the second half. But the second half of the season is at Indiana, Michigan at home, at Minnesota, Penn State at home, at Iowa, and then you got Maryland at a neutral site, sort of Ford Field. So, people don't know where the next win's necessarily coming from, and that includes Nebraska. But they view Nebraska as a more beatable team than probably at least 3 of the teams left on their schedule. And so when you're talking about a team that hasn't been to a bowl game in a while, hasn't been playing from above 500 in a while, it's sort of a I don't say it's a pivot point, but it's a game that matters. It's consequential. If you win it, it can potentially change a lot about what your season looks like. If you don't, people are wondering how you get to 6 a little bit, and so that's how big it is.
Graham, I'll get you out of here on this. You mentioned kind of the recent struggles of Michigan State football and kind of some of the things they've been going through and the challenges that the schedule presents in the back half of the season. What constitutes a successful year 2 for Jonathan Smith in East Lansing?
They need momentum, and that can look at several different ways. That could be they got to get to a bowl game. They got to get to 6. I think that would be problematic. But when I say momentum, it's got to feel that way. It's losing that last game to Maryland wouldn't be great if that, or if it was the Michigan game is going to be really, really important. And partly that they have a chance to win it, but also in how he treats it, how they look. I mean, last year they went to Michigan and they were sort of pushing Michigan around early in the game. They had probably his worst coach game, a couple disastrous decisions that turned the game, and Michigan wound up winning pretty comfortably in the end. And then there was a scuffle on the field, and Michigan State's AD at the time complained about it to the Big Ten office, and when the Big Ten office did nothing, MSU kind of put its tail between his legs, and people did not appreciate the fight. Like the hatred for Michigan around these parts is real, and they didn't feel like Jonathan Smith understood the rivalry, and they just felt like they let themselves get bullied. So that game is going to determine a lot of. It's a home game of sort of the psyche of the fan base in this season, but they've got to have momentum coming out of it for it to feel like a success. And I think you'll sort of know it when you see it. And that the minimum of that is a competitive day against Michigan and 6 wins, but it might even take slightly more.
That's Graham Couch, columnist for the Lansing State Journal. Graham, appreciate the time as always. I hope you enjoy the game this weekend, but I hope you enjoy it a little bit less than we do.
That sounds good. Thanks for having me.
That's Graham Couch from the Lansing State Journal.